Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir al primer Producto Valencia digital o 100%. Va a ser un experimento que nunca hemos hecho, pero bueno, dada la situación en la que nos encontramos, vamos a ver esto qué tal se nos da. Como es un evento en inglés, que es otro de los experimentos que estamos haciendo hoy, voy a hacer la introducción así mezclando inglés y español para aquella gente que se une y que solo hable inglés, que nos puedan seguir. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us in this first Producto Valencia online session. We have here the first event also in English, so it's going to be an experiment for all of us in trying to manage this in 2 languages and doing it online. First, I'd like to introduce a little bit Product Tank and Mind the Product, which is a product community, probably the largest product community in the world. It started back in 2010 in London. And since then, it's just grown like crazy. I think that they're live in more than 350 cities, and you have Product Tank events pretty much everywhere and almost every week. Lo que estaba diciendo, Product Tank es una serie de eventos centrados en producto y organizados por Mind the Product, que es una organización que lleva en marcha desde 2010. Empezó en Londres con 25 Product Managers juntándose a contarse sus miserias en un pub, y ha crecido hasta una comunidad enorme, probablemente la más grande de producto del mundo. Se encuentra a día de hoy en más de 350 ciudades y tiene eventos prácticamente semanales. Como decía, es una comunidad organizada por Product Managers para Product Managers. Se trata de eventos gratuitos, con un tono bastante informal, y en lo que se busca es iniciar conversaciones dentro de la comunidad de producto para ir fomentándola y que entre todos vayamos creciendo. For those who don't know it, Product Tank is a global organization managed by product managers, focused on product managers. Basically, it's just a free event, informal, in which we have different topics about product. And the goal is just to kick off the local product communities. Hasta hace un tiempo, los eventos se estaban organizando a través de Meetup, pero Meetup como organización y como producto está cambiando, y las ideas es que van a empezar a cobrar tanto a los participantes como a los organizadores. Entonces, Mind the Product lo que ha hecho ha sido montarse su propia plataforma para poder organizar estos eventos sin que repercuta con ningún tipo de coste a los asistentes. Entonces, lo que estamos haciendo en estos momentos es vivir la transición de Meetup a Mind the Product, la plataforma. A día de hoy se publican en ambos sitios, pero en algún momento dejarán de publicarse en Meetup para publicarse en la plataforma de Mind the Product. Así que desde aquí os invitamos a que visitéis mindtheproduct.com, busquéis el Product Tank Valencia y os unáis para estar al tanto de cuándo organizamos los siguientes eventos. So, again, what I was saying, Meetup is changing as an organization, as a product, and before they were charging mostly only the organizers, but now they're also planning to charge the attendees. Mind the Product, as I was saying before, the goal is just to offer free events. So just planning ahead for whenever Meetup starts charging the attendees as well, they created their own platform in which to organize the events. So from here, we invite you just to visit mindtheproduct.com, look for the Product Tank Valencia local chapter, join us, and from there, you will be notified whenever there's a new event in Product Tank Valencia. Enough of Product Tank and Mind the Product. Let's talk about what's important here today. We have with us Chris Nicol, Group Product Manager at 15Five. He's going to talk to us about his experience working as a remote product manager. I'm not going to explain better than himself what he does, so I'm going to pass it to him. So, hoy tenemos a Chris Nicol con nosotros. Es Product Manager de 15Five. Lleva como 4 o 5 años trabajando como un Product Manager en remoto, y va a contarnos su experiencia sobre cómo es trabajar como un PM remoto. Así que, sin más dilación, dejo a Chris que tome la palabra y disfrutar de la sesión.
gracias, Pablo. Bienvenido todos. Soy Chris, soy holandés. Lo siento, mi español es muy mal y no tengo suficiente para hablar con mi trabajo. Entonces, I will use English. So, thanks everyone for joining. I think just need to flip over Pablo to my slides. The joys of the experiment of the first one for Valencia. There we go. I got my slides up here. So a little bit about me, just to kick us off. So I grew up in Ireland. I lived there for 17 years, and yeah, I lived there for 17 years, and then moved to Canada. I lived there for 18 years. I met my wife. So I've seen comments that you guys can't hear me well. Just gonna take a quick look at the settings.
Okay. Hopefully that's a little bit easier to hear me, and I'll speak up a little bit more. So I lived in Canada for 18 years. Met my wife there, loved living in Canada, but we decided we needed a change in our lives, and so we moved to Spain, and now we've been living in Valencia for 2 years and absolutely love it here. For work, I started as a front-end engineer. I did a lot of front-end work on the web, in Windows applications, and I sort of found myself falling into product management. I think that a lot of people experience this, is that sort of they just find their way into product management. It's not sort of a career choice, it just sort of happens, and that's what happened to me. And actually, it wasn't until someone joined the company and said, "Oh, you're a product manager," that I even learned about that term. So I think I've been doing it for a couple of years before I even learned about the term product manager, and it was just a whole new world opened up to me. So I worked at this company called IQ Metrics in Vancouver, BC, Canada for about 8 years. I left there to get back to something that was a bit smaller, more startup, a bit more of a purpose to it, and that was Chimp. It's a charitable giving platform that was out of Vancouver, and through them, they supported remote work. And so I actually moved to Spain while working with them. And then about 6 months or so after moving to Spain, I made the change over to 15.5, which is where I'm currently am. And I absolutely love it there. It's a great experience. And about a third of our company at 15.5 is remote normally. But of course, with the pandemic, our whole company is working remote, as many of you are as well. And in total, between when I was working as a front-end engineer and then these past 2 years in Spain, I've had about 4 years working experience as remotely, but 2 of that as a product manager. So when I was talking with Pablo and with Marius about doing this presentation, Pablo brought up a couple of questions that he had, and I really thought this was a great way of framing this presentation. And so really the questions we're trying to answer today for a lot of the people here is, can I be successful as a remote PM? I think there is a lot of what we do as product managers that we often think of requiring needing to be in person, needing to have those ad hoc interactions, being able to support our teams, being able to meet with people very easily. And there's a bit of a barrier of like, can I actually do this job remotely? Whereas many other professions are maybe considered easier to do remotely. So I wanted to talk about that and hopefully give a good answer to that. And then also, do you even want to be a remote PM? I certainly, when I started out on this, was very nervous about whether or not I would enjoy my job as much as a remote PM. So I want to address that question as well. So what we're going to cover today, there's sort of 3 sections I want to cover. The first is on supporting yourself. So if you can't support yourself, you're not going to be able to support your team. And going back to Josh Ellman's seminal article on Medium, the role of a product manager is to help their team ship the right product to the customer. And if you can't support yourself, you're not going to be able to support your team. So it's really important to take care of yourselves. Then I wanted to talk about some of the remote best practices I've learned. So just things that make it a little bit easier to be remote, and that are really important in being successful in the job. And then because we work with teams, I wanted to focus on some team rituals that we do at our company and that I've experienced over the years that really help to stay connected, productive, and inspired. So let's start with supporting ourselves. The first thing I'm going to say is wear pants. So I think there's a great joke going around on the news when people get on of like, oh, are you actually wearing pants, or are you just wearing like the shirt and tie or whatever else? And I say it sort of jokingly, but it's important. It's important to get yourself into a mindset that you are going to work. Do not sit in bed or on the couch or anything like that. You have to get yourself into that mindset that I am working now. And it makes a significant difference. Trust me, as someone who has done both sides of this, when I don't get serious about work, I don't really feel like I'm connected to it. And also it just bleeds into my home life as well. So one of the things that I recommend is creating new routines. So you would have your normal routines of commuting to work, picking up a coffee on the way to work, or whatever those normal morning routines are. In your new sort of remote life, create new routines that you can depend on that help to give you that sort of mindset shift from, oh, I'm actually starting work now. Another important point is remote does not equal always on. You need to have set working hours. You need to really make sure that you're being committed to those, that you're communicating those to your team, to the people you're working with, and really ensuring that you separate your work and life balance. And again, if you were to talk to my wife, I am not always good about this. I often bleed into those evening hours or start a little early. So this is something that I'm always working on. You're not going to get it perfect, but always try to respect your hours and try to give yourself a difference between work and home. Another great way to do that is to create a work profile or a home profile on your computer, so that you can log out at the end of the day, but still use your computer to do other things. There's lots of stuff that I still use my computer for, but I switch into that home profile, and then I'm not as, Slack isn't as readily available or anything else. And, especially with what we're going through with this worldwide pandemic, take vacations, take time off, even if you're just going to stay home, but and encourage your team to do the same, but really you need to take some time to yourself. Another important thing about supporting yourself is finding time for deep work. It's very easy, and this isn't just for working remote, but it becomes even more important as you work remote. But studies show that to maximally effective and productive, you need to go into deep work on a single task. And so I highly recommend blocking off time in your calendar, actually marking it as busy. If possible, create a routine where it's maybe deep work Wednesdays, or maybe you're doing afternoons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but get into a routine of really having that deep work time. And when you're in there, turn it off, protect this time, turn off Slack, turn off email, really get focused in on the work that you need to do, and really protect your time, and communicate that with your team. Let your team understand that this time is important to you and that they should also do the same. And then finally, when it comes to supporting yourself, is create a dedicated workspace. Now, this might not be applicable to everyone, and I can certainly appreciate that a lot of people don't have the room to make a dedicated workspace. But really, if you can, try to have a dedicated workspace that you go to. Natural lighting is really important. It's really important for your own health, mental health, and physical health. An ergonomic setup, so whether that's a good chair or standing desk. If you are standing, get a good mat to stand on. Do whatever you have to make sure that you feel comfortable in that space. A good webcam is super important, especially as product managers. A lot of how we communicate is through our expressions, through our body language. If you don't have a good camera, or if you're not using your camera, you're losing some of the ability to communicate. So having a good webcam really is not just for the people looking at you, but it's for your ability to communicate. And also a good microphone, as it was evident at the start of this presentation. If you can't hear me, that's really bad. And then in an ideal world, keep that workspace separate from the rest of your house, so you can close the door, not only to shut out the distractions from your home, but also so that you can leave it behind at the end of the day and feel like you've actually left work. So that's on supporting yourself. Now I want to talk about a few of the best practices I've picked up and other best practices I've learned from my teams at 15.5. And so I've got 5 that I want to go over, but the first being effective communication. Again, this is super, super important as a remote, but also, not working. Where you're working in office, and effective communication is super important. But when you're working remote, it becomes even more important. Cultivating great relationships, finding times for wins, team playbooks, and then getting things done. So starting off with effective communication, you must be clear and explicit in communication. I cannot emphasize this enough. So many problems that exist within teams, whether they're interpersonal problems, project problems, are often down to just, poor communication, just a lack of communication. So take the time to be verbose, take the time to be very clear, take the time to be very explicit. If you bury a question in a paragraph of context and expect someone to pick up on that question and to execute on it, then that's more on you than it is on them. So really break apart your communication, be as clear and as explicit as you can. The next is active listening. Now, I'm sure this is evident here. There's probably some people have answered a Slack message while I've been talking, or read an email or sent an email. Especially when you're working remote, it's very easy to get distracted in Zoom meetings and in conversations, because the whole rest of the workday is still sitting in front of you in the screen. And so really practice active listening. Turn off Slack where you can, turn off notifications where you can, but really dedicate your time to actively listening, because it will help you as a product manager. A lot of what we do is trying to understand where customers are at, where teams are at, and if you're not active listening, you're going to miss a big part of that. Follow up and follow through. So again, when you're working remotely, there is some disadvantages. You don't have that opportunity to just run into someone in the hallway or stop by their desk or catch them at lunchtime. So you have to make sure that you keep organized and that you follow up on tasks that you have, or requests that people have made of you. And then also, follow through with those tasks, but also then follow up with other people. We're busy people. This is our, 21st century worker is a busy person with lots of things coming at them. So don't be afraid to follow up with people. If you do it in a respectful and kind way, it doesn't feel bad for that other person. So make sure that you're following up and following through. The next on effective communication is making agreements. So I think a lot of the problems that exist in relationships and with communications is unknown expectations, where someone comes with an expectation and just expects that person to pick up on that. So really, the better than setting expectations is to make agreements. Really take the time to say, hey, I need this thing from you by Friday. Is that time frame work for you? Or if someone's asking something of you, ask them, when do you need that by? Can we create an agreement on when you need that thing or what you need, and be really explicit with that agreement, but make sure it's a two-way agreement. It's not just a one-way expectation that you're delivering to someone. Also then communicate where the work happens. So we have a lot of tools, whether it's Jira, Mural, InVision, Figma. We've obviously got Slack. If you're using email still, like really folks, let's get over that now. But the idea is that there's so many different tools. So communicate where the work is actually happening. If you've got something to talk about on a story, use the Jira comments or use the comments in Trello. If you're got feedback on a design, use Figma, use InVision. Bring the communication to where the work happens. And then the last and most important is over-communicate. I had a mentor once who said that you can never over-communicate enough. And you should keep communicating your message until you start hearing those people talking about the message that you've been communicating. And so if you expect when you say something one or two times, or you put something in a presentation, that everyone in the room, everyone in the company, everyone in the business is going to get that, then that's on you, not on those people. Again, we know that people are busy. We know that information is getting thrown at them all the time. So over-communicating the message should be the expectation, so that you make sure that people are clear, make sure that people are getting what you're laying down. So just to talk a little bit about how we do some communication at 15.5. So of course we use Slack. We have discipline team huddles. So as a product management group, we meet every week. We have an agenda. We actually have a monthly facilitator. So one of the PMs will take that on. We have guests, but we come together once a week. And again, that's really important to keep the communication flowing, to keep the knowledge flowing, and to keep a connection to the people that you're working with. We also have squad huddles. So we're using the sort of the typical Spotify model of squads. And so the team, the cross-functional team that I work with, we have a regular huddle that is outside of the standard sort of Scrum or Agile processy meetings that we have. So again, stay connected. We also have a Slack announcements channel. So we're sharing updates with the rest of the company, one place where they can go to get announcements on what's happening within the product team. We do a lot of one-on-ones. One of the things that is actually the centerpiece of our product, so the name 15.5 comes from the idea that we do these weekly check-ins that's a reflective or retrospective for yourself to think about the week, your wins, your challenges, and share that with your manager. And the 15.5 comes from it takes 15 minutes for the employee and 5 minutes for the manager. And that weekly check-in is a great way to stay connected with your manager, to reflect on the week that you've had, and really help yourself in your own growth. And then, of course, we use Google Docs and Quip, all of those wonderful things. The next best practice I wanted to talk about is cultivating relationships. And so the real key here with working remotely is that you're investing in the relationships. Relationships will happen whether you want them to or not. As you work with people, you will develop a relationship with people. But what I mean by cultivating relationships is really having an intent to create a positive relationship with the people that you're working with, and not just let that relationship happen the way it happens based on the way you're working with people. So a few ways to do that, one-on-ones. So one-on-ones are often sort of classically thought as employee and manager one-on-ones, but I highly recommend doing one-on-ones with other people that you're working with on a regular basis. Find time to connect and not just talk about the tactical work that needs to happen, but talk about more strategic things, get to know each other better. And we'll talk a little bit more about effective ones in a minute, one-on-ones in a minute. Another thing that comes out of 15.5 and our best self-management philosophy is best self kickoffs. So this is the idea that over time, you're going to learn a lot about the people that you work with. And so you'll learn what their pet peeves are. You'll learn what motivates those people, what energizes them, what doesn't. But the idea of a best self kickoff is to take those questions and put them up front and say, great, let's actually talk about these things without needing to just learn these over time. So it's like a shortcut to really getting to know someone and to really cultivating those relationships. So we have questions like, what are your pet peeves? And then you sit down, both people answer that and try to understand, what's happening, what motivates you, what doesn't motivate you. Lots of really, really interesting questions to try and build that relationship. And that's not something you need our product for. That's just something you can do yourselves. You can just find good questions to learn and build and cultivate a better relationship with those people. And then we also do this at the squad level. So rather than just on a one-on-one basis, we also just put it out there. Like, what's our reason to be on this squad? What are we looking forward for the most? How do we like to work? What are some of the ways that we like to receive feedback? Sharing that knowledge and that information just makes it so much easier to create great relationships within your squad. Also then cultivating relationships is actually part of one of our values. And one of the practices that we have is assume positive intent. And I think this is not necessarily I don't want this to come across as like, oh, you should always just assume that people are being nice to you. That's not the case. But you want to try as much for yourself as for anyone else to assume positive intent. Assume that whatever that person is doing in the situation, they're doing it with a good reason to do it. They're not doing it to just piss you off or to make you look bad. They're doing it with some reason that is positive in their mind. And then working back to try and understand that reason, that's how you can start to have more empathy for people, to understand more where they're coming from, instead of just making a giant assumption that people are doing things in a negative way. So I highly recommend, where you can, assume positive intent. We talked a little bit about this before with the agreements, but expose expectations and make agreements. So try and understand, like, take time. This is not stuff that will just happen automatically. But if you're going to cultivate great relationships, ask people what expectations they have. You know, like a great question as a product manager is when you start working with a team is, what expectations do you have for me as a product manager? And then make actual agreements and say like, no, that thing that you expect me to do, that's not what I'm going to be doing. That's not part of my role. Let's make an agreement as to what you can expect from me as a product manager for this team. So really expose those expectations, ask the questions that help you understand those expectations, whether that's with your squad, whether that's with stakeholders, whether that's with your manager or leadership. Take the time to expose those things and make agreements. And then the last point I want to make about cultivating relationships is having a culture of feedback. And so this doesn't happen overnight. This is not something that you can just wish to happen within your company, but it does take effort and it is something that you can achieve. If you reach out to people and you give people feedback, you will get feedback in return. It is a cyclical thing. Trust me, I've done this. The more that you give people feedback, the more feedback you can expect. And as product managers, we know the value of feedback. It is absolutely critical to the success of the products that we build. So it should also be absolutely critical to the relationships that we're building. So again, if you're starting out with feedback, don't jump into the really hard to hear feedback. People are human. So start with positive feedback. Start with, hey, I really liked what you did in that presentation, or I really liked how you jumped in that meeting and shared your perspective. But start giving feedback on a regular basis and start creating a culture of feedback. It will make the world of difference in building those relationships and become really powerful for you. The next thing, the next best practice I want to share is celebrating wins. So some of the things that we do is a monthly spotlight in our company Boost. We have the product announcements channel where we're putting out like what we've released, whether it's internal or public. Our product has this concept of high fives, which is a lot like a tweet or something similar. You can see one in the second image here where you can just send out and say, hey, I'm really grateful for what you did. And that's really that positive reinforcement and sharing those wins. We do demos and we put videos out there. Again, working remote, having asynchronous videos is really important. And then we're still exploring other ways, but try to take time to celebrate the wins. Again, when you're working in an office, it's a little bit easier to sort of, have a round of applause when something big happens, or, have a few drinks after work, or have a lunch together and talk about some of the things that are happening. And often when you're working remote, you jump into a meeting and it's all just about that meeting. So take the time to celebrate the wins. It's super, super important. Next up is, and again, this sort of comes back to that creating agreements and being really explicit, is having a squad or a team playbook. So what we do is we break down the working hours. So we make sure that everyone's working hours are accounted for. I, of course, have folks across all different time zones in the US, in Eastern Europe. And so really knowing when people are available, setting an expectation, that's really helpful. Another thing that we'll stick into our, playbook is the squad channels. So we have very specific squad channels. So we have a squad channel that is like a water cooler, just a fun channel to share like what's happened over the weekend and things like that. There'll be channels for devs, there'll be channels for projects, and that helps reduce the noise so that people are able to focus in on what they care about at that time. If you have one big channel where there's just tons of noise, people sharing memes at the same time, people are sharing project updates, asking questions, things will get lost in that noise. So really create specific channels, and then in that playbook, document what they mean. Because you can say it once to someone or a couple of times, but over a month later, people will forget and they start to blur those lines. So keeping it in a playbook, being really explicit, having those agreements. And then other squad agreements that come out of our retros and things like that are really powerful for helping you move forward as you go through your normal agile process. But again, writing them down, having them in a playbook really helps. And then the last thing I want to share on sort of a best remote practice, and this isn't just remote, but I just can't say how important this has been for me in my working life, is the Getting Things Done book by David Allen. I have no affiliation with this. I just highly, highly recommend it. And so this is a work-life management system that helps you really get the stuff out of your head and get all past all the overwhelming like stuff that's getting thrown at you, and lets you be focused, lets you be clear and sure of what you're working on. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Now I want to talk a little bit about the teams and how we can help them stay connected, productive, and inspired. So I talked before about one-on-ones, but it's really, really important to have effective one-on-ones. So use video wherever possible. Before I mentioned the body language, your expressions, they're super important in communication. So use video wherever you can and encourage those people you're meeting with to use video as well. Collaborate on an agenda in advance. If you walk into a one-on-one and say, hey, what do you want to talk about? Don't expect the best conversation of your life. But if you give people a time to collaborate on an agenda up front and come up with talking points, you'll find that'll go a lot better. Set aside time for non-work related chat. So again, when you're working remote, we lose some of those opportunities to have lunch with people, to have coffee with people, to have just a random meeting in a hallway and a conversation. So set aside, make sure you're making time for non-work related chat and getting to connect with people at a non-work level. And then most importantly, create a safe space to allow people to be vulnerable. And that doesn't mean just saying, hey, this is a safe space, you can be vulnerable. The way to create a safe space and help people be vulnerable is by leading by example, by being vulnerable yourself, by putting yourself out there and letting people know this is a safe space to have an open conversation. And if you do that, you'll have much, much more effective one-on-ones. And again, not just with manager-employee, but also with other people that you're working with on the team. Design studios. So again, one of the real challenges as a remote PM is having those creative brainstorming, whiteboarding moments with your team. And so really find a great tool that helps you do it. I highly recommend Mural, but there's plenty of others out there. But find something that you can use to really do an amazing brainstorming remotely. So set structure around these things. There's lots of gainstorming activities out there. Some of the favorites at 15.5 are Crazy Eights and customer persona maps, but there's tons and tons. But create structure around these design studios. Don't just go in with a blank canvas and hope for the best. Have a Slack channel to share sketches, live sessions. So people have paper and pen, they have camera phones. So a great way to share that where it's hard to draw on a whiteboard digitally is being able to have a Slack channel where people can drop in sketches that they're making. Obviously, with any sort of design, don't just limit it to designers and PMs, but have cross-functional group of peers, stakeholders, engineers, and then allow different types of inputs. Don't just have design studios that focus on sketching. Have words, digital mind maps, themes, lots of things that help people be creative where sketching isn't for everyone. Another super important ritual is our team activities. And so this is actually my team of PMs that I work with at 15.5, or at least most of them. And so we will do on a regular basis happy hours and other things to stay connected that aren't work related. So we have our product manager huddle once a week. It's very focused on work stuff. But we also have these happy hours where we can just get to know each other and learn more about each other. And so again, having some structure to this is super important. So we'll have maybe a table question. So we'll ask a question. Sometimes they're fun, like what are your current tabs that are open? Sometimes they're more deeper, like how do you find gratitude in your work? How do you stay grounded? So there's lots of great questions that are out there. You can Google questions and and so the team activity is super important to stay connected. Also, there's tons of fun games out there. So there's stuff like Draw Something, You Don't Know Jack. There's lots of cool online tools that help people working remotely have a little bit of fun. But definitely take that time because you're not going to be able to go to a bar and have a drink, at least not for a while. The last point on second last point on team rituals is virtual retreats. So think of this as sort of the classic sort of corporate offsite meets Zoom. So we do these both at a PM level, and I'm starting to do them more at the squad level as well. So some of the things we're trying to do are strategic planning, release planning, talking about processes, like how are we going to update or iterate on how we're doing our road mapping, how we're structuring our teams. So there's lots of important discussions that we need to do, and they're very hard to do in those 1 hour meetings, trying to find time in people's calendars. So instead, planning well in advance, blocking out up to 6 hour blocks, multiple days for deep collaboration. It's a real powerful experience, and it works better than I would have thought. Video is a must. Again, encourage people to turn off Slack and email and be present, canceling other meetings that they may have. Take frequent breaks, have a meal together, and also have like a fun event as part of this. And so we're going to be doing another product manager retreat in May, and it's something that I'm very excited for. And we're going to really, it's sort of, think of it as like in Mario Kart or one of those little video games where you hit the little booster. That's what it feels like for your team. You hit that little booster, and it really just propels the whole team forward, and you make a lot of momentum for that investment. I know it's hard to try and block off time like that, but invest in it because you'll definitely find it rewarding. And the last team ritual that I wanted to share is sort of a weekly kickoff. So again, when you're working in an office, everyone comes in on a Monday morning, has a bit of conversation, you get settled into the week. It's very easy to sort of know, like, I'm starting Monday, this is a brand new week. As we work remotely, the days can often sort of blur in together. So really, like, kicking off the week is a really powerful thing. So what we do is in our team or squad channel, so we do this with the PMs, but then we also do this in our squads, is we'll have a Slack announcement. It's co-created with like our trifecta, which is the tech lead, the designer, and the product manager, or within our leadership group for product management. And we'll create a specific Slack message that talks about what are the goals for this week, what are we focusing on, if there's any big events, are we releasing something, is there a QA deadline or any sort of deadline that we might have, does anyone have time off for the week, anything important that we want to announce, and we kick off the week with that announcement in Slack. And then we also have how was your weekend? So, have the focus on work, but then also following that up with how was your weekend and trying to stay connected. People share photos of their weekend. My wife and I had a little beach party this weekend. So of course we can't go to the beaches here in Spain. And so we, on our terrace, just pulled out our beach furniture, made paella, made some strawberry daiquiris, and called it a beach day. And so I shared some photos of that, and it made me good. It made me feel good to be able to connect to my team, and also my team able to connect to me. So I want to summarize a little bit. So the first point is to support yourself first. If you are not supporting yourself, if you're not in a good space, you're not going to be able to help your teams, you're not going to be successful at work. And so have a routine. Remote is not always on, so make sure you're giving yourself that ability to break from working. Create time for deep work, and if you can, have a dedicated workspace. Second, some of the remote best practices. So be effective with your communication. This is an ongoing skill that you will learn over time, that you need to, practice. I know a lot of people have their resume, great communication skills, but the reality is that this is a lifelong learning exercise. So keep on trying to improve how you communicate. Have that team playbook to help, keep it all explicit as to how you're working, your squad playbook. Find time to celebrate the wins. It is so critical. You've got to have some positivity in there, because the negative will always bubble up. The negative will always come out in meetings, and you want to make sure that you're with intent are sharing those wins. The Getting Things Done by David Allen, highly recommend that book. And then last is that cultivating great relationships. Relationships will happen anyway, but it's your choice to cultivate those great relationships. And then on the remote team rituals, so how do you stay connected as a team? How do you inspire the team? Have effective one-on-ones, not just with your manager, but also with other people that you work closely with. Use design studios to stay connected and creative together as a group, not limited to just designers and PMs, but including everyone and creating a space for everyone to be involved and be creative. Have explicit team activities that will help you stay connected to the teams in a non-work way, because work is always going to become the focus when you turn on Zoom. So having explicit time for team activities. And then the virtual retreats. Block out time, find time to go deep as a team, and that'll really help you. So I had those first two questions at the beginning. I want to sort of come back to them now. So can I be successful as a remote PM? So from my experience, I will say yes. I really do believe you can. It takes discipline, it takes routine, it takes a strong awareness of self, but it's definitely possible. And the skills that you're forced to learn as a remote PM and develop, they will help you in all areas of your life. So I had my hesitations when I started, but I'd like to say that I'm a successful PM at this point, and I certainly absolutely adored my work. And then, do you want to be a remote PM? I think that really depends on you. I know in the current pandemic, we're all sort of forced to be working remotely, or for some people, and I feel very bad for those people that haven't been able to work and are laid off or are waiting for things to open back up. But what I will say is, if you think that you won't like being a remote PM because you'll be ineffective, that it stifles your ability to be a PM, or if you think because you need those personal interactions, I would like to challenge your thinking. I am a very outgoing person who spent a lot of time having personal interactions with people when I worked in an office, but I've been able to really enjoy working as a remote PM for these last 2 years. However, it's not for everyone. I will say that being a remote PM is not going to be for absolutely everyone, or at least not while we normally, but right now we've got this pandemic, so everyone's sort of forced into that position. So that's it for me. I did want to mention just quickly, again, I mentioned 15.5 a little bit throughout, but 15.5 is really geared to helping manage remote teams and making that whole remote life and an adjustment to remote working a lot easier. It is free at the moment until June 15th. So if you're interested, or if your teams, you think you can help your teams in this remote world, please visit 15.5.com to learn more. And with that, I think we'll go to some questions.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris. That was really, really insightful. So yeah, indeed, we have some questions. I'm gonna add the rest of the team here. And the first question we have, you will be able to see it also there in the screen, is that if you could share how you use Design Studio concept for a particular problem or situation.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Marius, for this question. So just today, actually before this, I was in a mini design studio. And so we were just brainstorming ways that we could introduce a little bit more education into the product. So this was a lot of sketching. So it was a lot of trying to think of, to support our designers, other ideas that we might be able to have in the product. So that's one example. But another example was we're looking at something we call rule-based groups. So thinking of being able to build groups of people based on rules. And so there's a lot of concept to that. And so before we even get into coming up with designs or anything else, we want to understand the problems that we're trying to solve, the use cases that could take place. And so again, we use a design studio for that. So it's very text heavy. But rather than just leaving that to one person, we got in a room as a group and understood the problem that we were trying to solve, looked at it from a number of different angles, and then looked at use cases, ways we could solve it, and then later came back to actual designs. So those are some situations that we've used design studios for. I hope that answers the question.
Good, thank you. So we have another one from Damien. It's, how have you run remote brainstorming or collaborative thinking sessions? Yeah,
again, a great question, Damien. Glad to see you here. So again, with Mural, and I won't just sort of only talk about Mural because there's lots of other tools that do similar things. We really try to come up with a structure. And the structure, for example, I've got one coming up where we're going to be looking at some of the ways that we could add more data insights to our product. And so what we're going to use is a structure around what's the business objective that we want to get to, what's the customer outcome that we want to get to, what's the customer need, and what's our idea. And so creating a bit of a structure. So I go into Mural, lay this all out, create sections with very specific activities, and then, when we actually kick off that session, we walk through each of those activities. So if you put up a blank mural and just sort of say, hey, folks, go off and do a bit of brainstorming, don't expect amazing results. But if you create some structure, if you create specific activities, whether that's, and there's you can do lots of Googling around game storming and brainstorming activities, but bring those activities in, keep them short and simple. But yeah, definitely create a structure to that. Create the structure in Mural so people can just follow along and do their piece.
Great. We have another one from Damien. He's interested in hearing more about what types of activities have you been successful for your remote retreats.
Yeah. So again, we've done those sort of brainstorming, creative sessions at the retreats using Mural. We've had other sessions where we will, we use OKRs at 15.5. And so this is another example where we'll just open a Quip document, and rather than sharing it on a screen, each person is on Quip, or you could use Word. And we go through and just play around with wording and start coming up with the objectives, adding ideas, but actively doing stuff. If you sit around and talk, that is a powerful thing, and we definitely do some of that through our retreats. But what we try to do is do activities, actual work. So if you're not doing like a design brainstorming kind of studio, you can also just open a doc and start editing things. So with our OKRs, it's very much down to the wording and the intent, what we're going to measure. So we'll put a lot of things in and start to peel those things back and talk about them as we're writing them. Say, oh, I wonder if this wording, it works a little bit better. And oh, now that I hear you say that changes my perspective. But being able to see it written down really helps. So that's some of the activities to do. And then a good tip for these is reach out to your whole team and ask them what they want to cover. Start figuring out what the top topics are. So I'll send out a survey before a retreat and try to find out what people are interested in doing. We obviously have our own agenda too that we want to get to, but we want to hear what people want to do. So that's my answer for that one.
Good. And so for the last question is from Cumbres, asking if in your experience you find that remote work is slower or less effective compared to a non-remote team.
Yeah, I think that it is less the remote versus non-remote, but the team itself. So I have worked on lightning fast teams, and I have worked on, absolute, crazy slow teams. I don't think that the remote is the number one driver of whether or not the team will be slow and less effective, or highly high velocity, high output. And I think really what comes down to it is how the team works together. And I want to come back to that sort of cultivating relationships. If people have a strong working relationship with each other, that will be a far greater factor in whether or not that team is effective. So again, the remote is a factor, but I think that's, more of a, it's not really the sort of, it's more of a symptom than a cause. Let me put it that way. And I think that if you're working in a remote and you think the team's working slower, there's more to it than that. And I would really think about how you're setting yourselves up. Are you focused? Are you very clear? Are you working clearly together? But yeah, I wouldn't say that remote has slowed me down. In fact, the fastest team that I've worked on so far has been a team that actually the team that I'm working on right now. In Q4, we just killed it. We were incredibly effective. And so yeah, hope that helps.
So I have, if I can do it, I have one question. So how are you doing onboarding of the new PMs? Because I know that right now I hear a lot of people that this is a challenge. How are you facing this onboarding of new people? It seems like when you are in an office, it's much easier to do it right than in remote. So.
That's a great question. So in my role as a group product manager, I have 3 product managers that report to me, and I had started before all of them. And so I've had this great experience of going through being remote and onboarding people who are also remote. And it is challenging for sure. And I think, again, it comes down to, so we use Sapling. There's lots of sort of onboarding HR tools out there, but really being explicit about the experience that person's going to go through in the first couple of weeks, the first few months. But again, going back to one of the things that I talked about in the best self kickoff, like that is a absolute critical part of onboarding and getting assimilated into a group, because what you're doing in that, beyond just asking those questions of, what are your pet peeves, what energizes you, why did you join this company, what motivates you, those types of questions, we also go through in that best self kickoff your job description and get really clear on your role, what's expected for you from the next couple of months to the first 3 months, 6 months, year, and make sure again that there's an agreement there, that person doesn't feel like, hey, I'm just getting told what's expected of me. I'm actually able to influence that and create an agreement there. So it's definitely challenging, but again, it as with any of these things with remote, it just takes a little bit more intent, a little bit more structure, being more explicit, communicating very clearly, and I think you can really overcome it. But definitely the best self kickoff was a phenomenal way for me to learn about my folks. A great question. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
I have another question. Are you at 15.5 100% fully remote, or did you get to see each other at some point during the year?
Yeah, this is something I was going to add in, but whether I forgot it or decided not to. But one of the things that I definitely learned about working remote is when you can, and obviously in the current climate we can't, but when you can, do try to find time to meet people in person. If you've got the budget or you've got the ability, even if it's just one person, if it's someone else that works in a city close by you, do take the time to meet with people. So what I was doing prior to this, so we have a company retreat once a year where the whole company comes together. And then we also had an R&D retreat. So that's the product management, product design, and engineering. We all came together once a year. But then I also made sure, so I've traveled back to Vancouver to see my family there and took a trip down to San Francisco to meet with the team. So if you can, obviously post-pandemic and if there's budget there, taking time to meet with people is super valuable, because I don't want to say that like life is perfect remote, because you still need those human interactions. You still need to be able to have those moments with people that you can't accomplish on Zoom. So yes, wherever you can, create space. Ideally, I would say once a quarter, meet someone else that you work with in person. And if it can't be someone else that you actually work with, stuff like this product tank is amazing. Meeting someone that gets what you're doing, you can speak that language, share some of the challenges, learn some beautiful things about how to improve as a product manager. Like, meet people that, if you can't meet people from your company, meet people that are in your same discipline, because that'll also help you and give you, because my wife is sick of hearing me talk about product management. She has no care about that at all. And so it's nice to be able to meet up with folks and chat about product management if you're not able to travel to where your coworkers are.
Great, thanks a lot. Just waiting to see if there's any last minute question. If not, I think we can leave it here. Thanks a lot, Chris. It's been really, really insightful and useful, at least for me. For the rest of the attendees, thank you all for joining. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir. Las diapositivas que ha compartido Chris las vamos a compartir a través de Meetup o Mind the Product con un comentario en el evento. Así que si de aquí surge cualquier pregunta, me imagino que las podéis postear directamente en el evento y se las hacemos llegar a Chris. So I was saying that the slides that Chris was presenting today will be shared with a comment in Meetup and the Mind the Product platform. And if there's any 11-hour question, just ask it directly into the event, and we'll make sure that Chris gets it and answers it. And again, muchas gracias. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you guys in the next Product Valencia session. Nos vemos.
Gracias.
All right.